I was on a call with a client worth $2 million when my mother texted me to remind me to bring extra folding chairs for Thanksgiving. That was the moment. Not a dramatic revelation, not a breaking point that announced itself with music and tears. Just my phone buzzing on my desk with a message about folding chairs while I was sitting in a corner office finalizing the largest contract of my career. Two versions of my life, side by side, in the same 30 seconds. I looked at the text, I looked at the contract on my screen, and for the first time in 15 years, I did not feel guilty for choosing the contract. My name is Brooke Langley. I am 36 years old. I founded an interior design firm called Meridian Studio 11 years ago from a desk in my one-bedroom apartment, and last year we generated $4.3 million in revenue. I have 21 employees, a corner office in downtown Nashville with floor-to-ceiling windows, and a client list that includes hotel chains, corporate headquarters, and residential projects that get featured in national design publications. My family thought I rearranged furniture for a living. This is the story of how they found out the truth. Not because I finally worked up the courage to tell them, but because the truth arrived at their Thanksgiving table on its own, wearing a very expensive blazer, and sat down without being invited. To understand what happened that November, you need to understand something about how I had been living for 15 years. Not the professional version, the other one. The one that existed only inside my parents' house, on holidays, in an apron. The one where I showed up early to help set the table and stayed late to wash the dishes, and somewhere in between became invisible to everyone, except when something needed to be carried from the kitchen. I had kept my two lives completely separate, not out of strategy, but out of exhaustion. Every time I had tried to share something real, a milestone, a client win, a publication feature, it had been received the way you receive a child's drawing. "That's nice, dear. Now can you check on the bread?" After enough of those responses, you stop offering. You drive the old car to their house. You wear the plain sweater. You put your phone face down when the contract emails come through, because explaining them would require more energy than you have left after 3 hours in a holiday kitchen. The folding chairs text was the moment I understood something clearly for the first time. I had been choosing their version of me over my own. Every Thanksgiving, every holiday gathering, every time I tied that apron, I was agreeing that I was the helpful one, not the successful one. The one who had time, not the one who had built something. That November, I stopped agreeing. What is strange about a decision like that is how ordinary the moment before it looks. There was no argument, no final straw that announced itself as significant. There was just my phone on my desk buzzing with a text about folding chairs, and a contract on my screen worth more than most people earn in a decade, and a sudden complete clarity about which one I was going to respond to first. I want to tell you the full story, because the beginning matters as much as the ending. The beginning is 15 years of a pattern that looked, from the inside, like family loyalty, and from the outside, like a woman who had somehow failed to build anything that required her to be somewhere else on a holiday. The ending is a Thanksgiving dinner my parents hosted for 24 people that ended with an empty kitchen, a very significant business contact, and a Facebook post that reached 300 people before midnight. But the middle is the part that explains both. And hey, if you're here right now, genuinely thank you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one, and it means more than I can say. The pattern had started 15 years earlier, at Thanksgiving 2009. I was 21, a recent graduate with a design degree and a portfolio full of student projects that nobody wanted to pay for yet. The economy had collapsed, my applications were disappearing without responses, and I was back in my childhood bedroom in Nashville, running out of both money and optimism. My mother, Sandra, did not ask whether I would handle Thanksgiving dinner for 20 guests. She announced it the way she announced most things, while standing in the hallway applying lipstick and already mentally in the living room. My sister Kayla, 19 and in her first year at college, was apparently too overwhelmed with coursework to help. though she spent that entire Wednesday on the couch watching television, which must have been a very demanding kind of study. When I pointed out that I had job interviews to prepare for, my mother said what she would say to me hundreds of times over the following decade. This is family, and family comes first. I spent 2 full days in that kitchen. Turkey, from scratch stuffing, roasted vegetables, green bean casserole, cranberry relish, dinner rolls, sweet potato pie. I polished the silverware. I arranged the centerpiece with dried flowers from the backyard because my mother had forgotten to buy fresh ones. When the guests arrived, I was still wearing the gravy-stained apron while my father stood in the living room introducing Kayla to his business associate as the daughter with real promise, the one who was going to do something with herself. He glanced at me as I walked past with a tray of appetizers and turned back without a word. That was the first sign. Kayla was the future. I was the kitchen. When one of the guests asked who had made the stuffed mushrooms, my mother waved her hand in my general direction and said that was just Brooke. She had time for that sort of thing, still figuring out what she wanted to do. The look of polite sympathy from that guest stayed with me for years. The pattern repeated at every gathering after that. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, birthday celebrations, anniversary dinners. I was always in the kitchen or setting up or scrubbing pots at the end of the night. Kayla was always at the table, being introduced, being discussed, being held up as an example of something. By the time I started Meridian Studio in 2013, the dynamic was so established that it functioned on its own. I didn't even have to do anything. I just walked through the door and the apron appeared. When I mentioned the studio to my mother that first year, she was reading a home decor magazine, which I found mildly ironic given what I was telling her, and she looked up just long enough to call it a sweet idea and ask if I could stop by the dry cleaner on my way home. She never asked about it again. Neither did my father. Neither did Kayla. So I stopped mentioning it. For 11 years, I built Meridian Studio in complete silence around my family. My first significant commission in 2015 was a boutique hotel lobby in Chattanooga, a project with a budget that exceeded what my father's company earned in a quarter. I sat in my car in my parents' driveway that Thanksgiving, having just received the signed contract that morning, and thought seriously about telling them. I ran through the likely responses. My mother would ask whether it was really stable work. My father would wonder why I hadn't gone into something more sensible. The conversation would end with me feeling smaller than when I started it. I went inside. I put on the apron. By 2019, Meridian Studio had 12 employees and a second office in Atlanta. By 2022, we were completing projects for national hotel groups and regional corporate campuses. A design industry magazine had profiled me the previous October. A full feature with a photograph of me in my office, the Nashville skyline behind me, describing me as one of the most quietly influential voices in Southern commercial design. I had never shown it to my family. I already knew my mother would find something in the photograph to comment on, and that would be the entire conversation. When I visited my parents, I drove the Honda I'd had since graduate school, instead of the Audi I'd bought the year before. I wore jeans and plain shirts. I answered the question, "What are you working on these days?" with something vague about some design projects and let the subject change on its own. The cost of that strategy was that I had no one in my family who actually knew me. Last Thanksgiving, November 2024, 3 weeks before the dinner that changed everything, had been the moment something finally cracked. I had just closed a deal with a regional hotel group worth $600,000. I walked into my parents' house still carrying the specific brightness of a significant professional win, and my mother handed me a printed prep schedule for the meal. 19 items timed to the half hour. 21 people reported to me. 3 industry publications had featured my work that year. I had negotiated contracts with developers whose projects ran into the tens of millions, and my mother handed me a prep schedule. I took it. I followed it. I served dinner to 22 people while Kayla talked about the pressures of her marketing director role at our father's company, a role that had been created for her, not competed for. My father praised her instincts. I could have mentioned that Meridian's revenue had grown 28% that year, There was no point. It would have landed the same way everything else landed. After dinner, standing at the kitchen sink with my hands in dishwater, I made a decision I could not yet name. This was the last time. I didn't know yet what that meant in practice. I just knew that somewhere between the prep schedule and the dishwater, 15 years had become enough. I drove home to an apartment my family had never visited because they had never thought to ask where I lived. 2 weeks later, a single phone call changed the shape of everything. November 18th, 2024. I was in my corner office reviewing material samples for a hotel renovation when my operations director and closest colleague, James Kowalski, knocked on the glass door and came in without waiting, which meant something significant because James was the kind of person who knocked on doors and waited for answers. He had been with Meridian since 2016, when the studio was me and 2 freelancers sharing a converted loft space downtown. He had watched me build something real while my family dismissed it as a hobby. He had the steady, unimpressible quality of a former military logistics officer who had seen actual emergencies and therefore maintained useful perspective on everything else. He set his phone on my desk, screen up. An email from a woman named Catherine Aldridge, CEO of Whitmore Group, a real estate development and hospitality conglomerate with properties across 8 states, worth an estimated $4.2 billion. I read it twice to make sure I understood it correctly. Whitmore Group wanted to commission Meridian Studio for an exclusive interior design partnership covering all their new property openings in 2025 and 2026. A flagship hotel in Atlanta, a boutique resort in coastal South Carolina, 4 corporate office renovations, and 2 residential tower common areas. They had reviewed our portfolio extensively, spoken with 3 of our existing clients, and examined our sustainable design certifications. The proposed contract value was $2.4 million. I asked James if he had verified it. He said he had called Whitmore Group's legal department directly before bringing it to me. It was real, but there was a condition. Catherine Aldridge met every major partner in person before committing. She was flying to Nashville for a meeting, and the only date she had available before leaving for a 2-month international trip was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, the day my mother expected me in the family kitchen by noon. If we couldn't meet that Wednesday, the contract would go to our primary competitor, a Charlotte-based firm called Pinnacle Design Group that had been aggressively pursuing Whitmore Group for over a year. James didn't need to explain what losing this contract to Pinnacle would mean. I already understood. Whitmore Group was the kind of client whose endorsement triggered referrals across their entire investor and developer network. Landing them meant expansion into the southeast coastal markets we had been trying to enter for 3 years. Losing them meant questions about why Whitmore had chosen someone else, which in the design industry was a question that followed you. There was one more detail in the email. Catherine Aldridge had mentioned that she had read the profile published about me in a design industry magazine the previous October. She had described my approach to sustainable commercial interiors as exactly aligned with Whitmore's development philosophy. She said she was looking forward to meeting the designer behind Meridian Studio. I had never shown that article to my family. My mother would have had a comment about the photograph. My father would have compared it to something Kayla had achieved. I had learned to protect my professional life from those responses the way you learn to protect anything fragile, by keeping it away from the hands most likely to drop it. I told James to confirm the meeting. And then, against every clear-headed instinct I had developed in 11 years of running a business, I picked up my phone and called my mother, because 15 years of conditioning does not disappear in a single good decision. The daughter who still hoped, who still thought maybe this time. She picked up the phone. My mother answered immediately and told me that Thanksgiving plans had grown. Kayla's colleagues from work were joining, 24 people. She needed me at the house by noon on Wednesday to start the prep work because Kayla was coming in from out of town and needed to rest. I told her I had a business meeting that day that I could not move. She laughed, a quick dismissive sound, and said I could reschedule whatever little project I was working on. That family came first. I told her this was not a project I could reschedule. She said couldn't or wouldn't, and I said both, and what followed was 15 years of everything compressed into 4 minutes. She told me I was selfish, that I always chose myself over the people who loved me, that Kayla gave and gave to this family, and I could not even show up to help cook one meal. I told her I was taking the meeting, that she could manage the dinner without me. She told me that if I chose a business appointment over my family on Thanksgiving, I should not expect a warm welcome when I eventually came back. I said goodbye and ended the call. James was in the doorway. He had heard enough of these calls over the years to understand what had just happened. He sat down across from my desk and said what I needed to hear, that in 8 years of working together, he had never seen someone more capable of leading a company and less capable of walking away from a kitchen. He said that this was the moment, that I could keep shrinking to fit their expectations, or I could choose my own path, but not both. A text arrived from Kayla. "Mom is upset. You're being selfish. You couldn't put family first for one day?" I put my phone face down on the desk. I told James the meeting was confirmed. He said, "Good. That's the right call." It was worth more than he knew. If this story is connecting with something real in your life, thank you for being here. Hit subscribe and leave me a comment. It genuinely keeps me going more than I can say. That evening, I went home to my apartment. The 2-bedroom place in East Nashville, with original hardwood floors and a wall I had covered in a custom mural that my team had helped me design, the apartment my family had never once visited because the invitation had never been extended and the question had never been asked. I packed a bag for the hotel where I was staying that Wednesday night, reviewed my portfolio materials, printed the contract summary James had prepared, and added one more thing to my bag. The October issue of a design industry magazine with my photograph on the cover page of the features section. I wasn't certain why I packed it. Something between proof and armor. A physical record that the life I had been building in silence was real and documented. That I was not exaggerating it to myself. That the woman who had spent 15 Thanksgivings in an apron was also the woman on that page. The meeting with Catherine Aldridge took place Wednesday morning in a conference room at the Whitmore Group's Nashville satellite office, a beautifully renovated Victorian building in Germantown that I noted, professionally, had been designed by someone with good taste and a generous budget. Catherine was in her mid-50s, precise and warm in equal measure, with the focused attention of someone who spent her career assessing people and spaces simultaneously. She had studied Meridian's portfolio in genuine depth. She asked about specific projects, specific material choices, the reasoning behind spatial decisions I had made 2 years earlier. I answered every question with the confidence of someone who had spent 11 years preparing for exactly this room. The meeting lasted 2.5 hours. At its conclusion, Catherine said she had what she needed and that her legal team would be in touch within the week. She mentioned, almost as a passing remark while gathering her things, that she had been invited to a Thanksgiving dinner that Thursday evening. A family in Nashville she had recently connected with through a mutual business contact. The family name was Langley. My stomach tightened in the specific way of someone who has just understood something they would rather not have understood. My father had been trying to attract investment interest for an expansion of his construction supply operation. He had apparently connected with Catherine through a regional business network. My mother had extended the dinner invitation. Catherine had accepted out of professional curiosity. She laughed and mentioned that she had been told Thanksgiving at the Langley house was not to be missed, that the food was extraordinary. The food that I was supposed to have started preparing that morning. I kept my expression completely even and told her I hoped she had a wonderful evening. At the door, she paused and said my surname seemed familiar. She asked if I had any connection to the Nashville Langleys, a family in the construction supply business. This was the moment where I could have told her everything, that those were my parents, that the extraordinary Thanksgiving dinner she was expecting had been organized around the assumption that I would be in their kitchen instead of in her conference room, that the woman she'd just spent 2.5 hours discussing sustainable interior design with was the same woman her hosts had spent 15 years handing an apron. Instead, I told her it was a reasonably common name in Tennessee. She nodded, satisfied, and left. I sat in that conference room alone for a long time afterward. The meeting had gone well, better than well. But sitting there with my portfolio and my magazine and the certain knowledge of what was about to happen 20 miles away at my parents' house, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not even satisfaction. Just a very clean, very quiet clarity about the way the next 24 hours would unfold without any intervention from me. I drove to my hotel. I ordered room service. I turned my phone off. For the first time in 15 years, I spent Thanksgiving Eve in complete peace. That peace required some maintenance. I was aware, in a distant way, that my phone was accumulating messages. My mother's escalating texts, my father's more restrained attempts to reach me, Kayla's shorter and sharper ones. I did not read any of them. I had made the decision I needed to make, and revisiting it through the lens of their reactions was not something I owed them or myself. What I did instead was something I rarely allowed myself to do. I sat with the fact of what I had built, not as a defense against their dismissal, not as proof I needed to show anyone, just as a real thing that existed and had value on its own terms. 11 years, 21 people who had built their professional lives around the work we did together. Clients who called us back for second and third projects because the first one had been done with care. A magazine that had decided, without being asked, that what we were doing was worth a full-page feature. I had spent 11 years building that and 15 years apologizing for not being available to cook a turkey. The two things had coexisted in complete silence, each unknown to the other, until that Wednesday in November when a woman named Catherine Aldridge invited both of them into the same room. I did not know yet exactly what would happen when she arrived at my parents' house the following evening and found no food and an empty kitchen. I had some ideas, but I had learned from running a business that the outcomes you spend the most energy anticipating are rarely the exact ones that arrive. The actual ones are usually more specific, more human, and more complete than anything you imagined. I reconstructed what happened at my parents' house that Thanksgiving from an account given to me 2 days later by Donna Prescott, a family friend who had attended Langley Thanksgiving dinners for over a decade and who called me on the Saturday after the holiday to apologize for things she had witnessed and not questioned for years. At noon on Thanksgiving Day, my mother walked into her kitchen, expecting what she had expected for 15 years. A daughter already at work, burners going, the smell of roasting turkey filling the house. Instead, she found cold appliances, empty counters, and no Brooke. What followed was an hour of escalating crisis management. Every catering company in Nashville, all booked or closed for the holiday. A grocery store run that found the prepared food section stripped bare by earlier, more organized families. My father making calls to 3 restaurants, all of whom were unavailable. My mother's phone history from that afternoon, which Donna described to me later, read like the contact list of someone who had suddenly discovered that one person had been doing the work of an entire catering operation and had not been replaceable by a single phone call. By 4 o'clock, when the first guests began arriving, the Langley Thanksgiving table held 2 pre-cooked rotisserie chickens from the grocery store, bagged salad, a store-bought pie still in its plastic clamshell, and a cheese platter that my father had assembled from whatever was in the refrigerator. My mother's smile, Donna told me, had the particular quality of a structural element under load, holding, but visibly. Catherine Aldridge arrived at 6:30. She came in with the ease of someone accustomed to walking into unfamiliar rooms and quickly understanding them. She shook hands with my father, complimented my mother on the house decorations, exchanged pleasantries with Kayla. My mother offered the explanation for the food situation using the phrase logistical complications, which was technically not inaccurate. Then Donna, sitting near the window with a glass of wine and her phone, stopped scrolling. She had found a Facebook post published earlier that afternoon. A photograph. Catherine Aldridge and a woman in a gray blazer, shaking hands in front of floor-to-ceiling windows, a Nashville skyline behind them. The caption read that Whitmore Group was thrilled to announce an exclusive design partnership with Meridian Studio and its founder, and included a tag to a design industry profile. Donna looked up from her phone and said, clearly enough for the nearby cluster of guests to hear, "Isn't that Brooke?" The room changed. My mother stared at the screen. My father leaned forward. Catherine crossed the room and looked at the post, and her expression moved through recognition, then surprise, then what Donna described as a kind of delighted understanding. The expression of someone who has just solved a puzzle they didn't know they were working on. Catherine told the room what the post confirmed. Meridian Studio was one of the most respected interior design firms in the region, and she had spent 2.5 hours that morning reviewing their work before signing a contract valued at over $2 million. The figure landed in the room like something physical. My father's face went through several colors in quick succession. $2 million was more than his company's annual profit. Catherine had also read the design magazine profile. She mentioned this. Donna was already pulling it up on her phone. The full feature, my photograph, my office, my work. She read a line aloud. She builds spaces that outlast the moment they were designed for. Guests were leaning in, passing phones, looking at the photograph of me that had existed in a national publication for a month, while the people in that room had no idea it was there. Kayla's expression, Donna told me, went through stages she did not have precise words for. My mother stood in the center of her Thanksgiving, watching it come apart in real time. She asked quietly why Brooke had never said anything. Catherine answered with the gentle precision of someone who had been running organizations long enough to recognize a pattern when she saw one. Perhaps, she said, because no one had thought to ask. The silence that followed was complete. Donna, who had watched me carry trays from the Langley kitchen for 12 years while the family barely mentioned me, said she had always wondered about me, that I was always in the kitchen, always working, and never at the table. She said she should have asked more questions years ago. My father's business associate stepped forward and said directly to my father that he had no idea his daughter ran a multi-million-dollar design firm and that he wished he had known. They could have discussed collaborations years earlier. My father had nothing to say to that. Catherine made the implications plain before she left. She told my parents that the woman they had apparently expected to spend her Wednesday and Thursday cooking for 24 people was the same woman she had just commissioned for over $2 million worth of work. She said she now understood clearly why I had not mentioned the family connection when she had asked about it. She set down her glass of wine. Untouched, Donna noted. Thanked my parents for the invitation, said the evening had been genuinely instructive, and left. The front door closed. The room erupted. In my hotel room across the city, I was reading a novel and eating the room service pasta I had ordered. I had no idea that my family's social world was in the process of reorganizing itself around a truth they had spent 15 years refusing to see. The professional momentum from the Whitmore partnership was immediate. Catherine's Facebook post was shared hundreds of times by the following morning. My inbox filled with inquiries from developers and hospitality groups I had been trying to connect with for 2 years. A design publication contacted James requesting an exclusive interview. 2 competing firms sent recruitment offers, both of which I declined without spending much time on them. By the end of November, James had projected a 32% revenue increase for 2025 based on the Whitmore contract alone. The social consequence in Nashville moved differently, slower, quieter, and more thorough. Donna Prescott posted something on her Facebook page the Friday after Thanksgiving. She didn't name anyone directly, but every person in the relevant social circle understood exactly who she was writing about. She described learning at a Thanksgiving dinner that someone she had known for years had been building something extraordinary while the people around her treated her as if she hadn't. She wrote about how easy it was to accept a story someone else told about a person without ever asking that person directly. The post gathered over 300 responses. Several of them were pointed questions addressed to no one in particular about the dynamics of families who cultivate one child's success while rendering another invisible. My mother's phone, Donna told me later, did not stop ringing that weekend. The women from her charity committee, her garden club, her church social group, all calling with the particular thinly veiled curiosity of people who have received new information and want to confirm their understanding of it. Why hadn't Sandra mentioned that her daughter ran a multi-million-dollar design firm? They had been under the impression that Brooke was still finding her footing professionally. They had been led in various gentle framings over many years to that impression. My mother's carefully cultivated image, devoted wife, supportive mother, anchor of the community, had developed a crack that no amount of composed explanation could fully close. My father's business associate, the same man who had stood in the living room and asked why he hadn't known about Meridian Studio, sent an email to my business address the following Monday. A formal inquiry about commissioning interior design work for a commercial project he was developing. He had found my website, reviewed our portfolio, and was reaching out without going through my father first. He didn't need to. My father was no longer the door you had to walk through to reach me. I responded with a project intake form within the hour. Kayla's situation was its own kind of reckoning. She had spent months positioning herself as the family's connection to Whitmore Group's Nashville operations, attending business events where Whitmore representatives appeared, sending carefully drafted emails to contacts in Catherine's network. She had done this with the confidence of someone who believed that proximity to our father's business ambitions was sufficient preparation for any professional conversation. The week after Thanksgiving, she sent a message to Catherine's office requesting an introductory meeting about potential collaboration opportunities for our father's company. Catherine's assistant responded with a polite message explaining that Miss Aldridge's schedule was fully committed through the first quarter and directing future correspondence to the standard inquiry process. She'd spent her entire adult life being told she was the successful one. That identity had taken one Thanksgiving dinner to dismantle. I did not feel satisfaction about her pain, but I will not pretend I felt nothing. On December 2nd, a letter arrived at my apartment by express mail, my father's handwriting on the envelope. Careful, deliberate, the penmanship of a man who very rarely writes letters and had to think about every word of this one. I almost didn't open it. When I did, I read it 3 times. He had spent the 5 days since Thanksgiving trying to understand how he had missed what had been in front of him for 11 years. He had told himself he was a good father. He had told himself he supported both his daughters. The truth was that he had seen what he expected to see. He had expected Kayla to succeed and looked for evidence of her success, and had expected me to struggle and found what he was looking for. He said he was wrong, and that he knew those words were inadequate, and that he was saying them anyway because not saying them felt worse. He said he didn't expect forgiveness. He said he wanted me to know that he saw me now. I read it 3 times, set it on my kitchen counter, made coffee, stood at the window and looked out at the street for a while. A letter did not undo 15 years, but it was a letter. And before that week, it was something I had never had. My mother sent a text on November 30th. It said she hoped I was well and that she had been thinking about our conversation. It was the careful, managed language of someone who is not ready to say what they actually need to say and knows it and is testing the air anyway. I read it and understood exactly what it was and left it unanswered. She was not ready. I had given her 15 years. She could have whatever time she needed. What I did not do was monitor any of it. I did not refresh Donna's post to see the comments accumulate. I did not ask mutual acquaintances what was being said. I had learned from 11 years of running a business that the best results come from doing the work correctly and then walking away while it lands. The truth operates the same way. You say it once, clearly, and you let it settle on its own terms. December arrived in Nashville with its usual mild version of winter. Cool enough for the good sweaters, warm enough for the Saturday farmers market, the city settling into the slower pace it took on between the holidays. My apartment felt different that month, not because anything physical had changed, but because I was in it differently, not carrying something out of the door with me every time I left. On December 7th, I picked up the phone and called my father. He answered on the first ring. I could hear my mother in the background asking who it was. He didn't tell her. I told him I was willing to try to build something different with this family, but that different meant exactly that. Not me in the kitchen while everyone else sat at the table. Not my work described as a hobby while Kayla's was described as a career. Not me invisible in rooms where she was celebrated. I told him that if I came to family gatherings going forward, I came as a guest, as a member of the family, not its unpaid catering department. That I needed him to be curious about my life, to ask genuine questions and actually want the answers. That the version of the relationship that had existed for 15 years was not available anymore. He said that was fair. He said it was more than fair. His voice, when he said it, had a roughness that I had never heard in it before. The sound of someone saying something they had waited too long to say and knew it. The silence that followed carried 15 years of things that had never been said between us, but for the first time it didn't feel hostile. It felt more like the particular exhaustion of two people who've been on opposite sides of something so long that they have forgotten what it was like to be simply on the same side. I told him I would come to Sunday dinner the following week, that I would come as a guest. That someone else could cook? The good Italian place he had always liked was still open, and they did family-sized portions. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and wrote out something that was not a letter and not an email, but a document. The kind I would draft for any complicated professional relationship that needed to be clarified in writing. I would attend family gatherings as a guest. I would not accept dismissal dressed as humor. I would not apologize for my work or make it smaller than it was. I would be treated as an equal, or I would not show up. I would respond to genuine effort and ignore performances that substituted for it. My time had value. I would spend it accordingly. Simple rules, the kind I should have written 11 years earlier. But here is what I have learned about timing. It is never too late to tell the truth about what you need. You are never too far in, too conditioned, too habituated to a pattern to step out of it. The moment you decide you deserve something different is the moment the pattern begins to change. I saved the document, stood at the window, and watched Nashville settle into the early December evening. The letter from my father was still on the kitchen counter. I returned to it sometimes, not to reread it, but to confirm it was there. Evidence of something I had not had before. I thought about Kayla for a while that evening, with more gentleness than I expected. She'd spent her entire adult life as the chosen one, the daughter who was going to do something, the one introduced at dinners, the one whose numbers were praised at the table. That kind of position has its own costs. You never develop anything on your own because someone is always clearing the path for you. When the path stops being cleared, you find out quickly what you have built independently. That discovery is hard at any age, and harder the later it comes. I hoped she would find something solid. I genuinely did. My mother had not called. She had sent 2 texts, careful surface-level messages that left everything real unaddressed. She was not ready. That was hers to work through. I had given her 15 years of patience at the kitchen sink. She could have whatever time she needed for this. What I had was a signed contract worth $2.4 million, a studio with 21 people who came to work because they wanted to build something, a corner office with good light, and a Sunday dinner invitation to my own family where someone else was doing the cooking for once. That felt like enough, more than enough. It felt like a beginning. December turned, the year wound down, and on the last day of it, I stood at my apartment window watching Nashville mark midnight with fireworks over the river. Small, bright, reflecting in the water below. James texted just after 12. Happy New Year. Next year is going to be something else entirely. I wrote back that it already was. I thought about Catherine Aldridge and what she had said before she left my parents' house, that she now understood why I hadn't claimed the family connection when she had asked. That single sentence had accomplished more in 30 seconds than anything I had said in 15 years of careful silence inside that house. Not because it came from me, but because it came from someone whose opinion my family measured in the currency they actually valued. That is the particular cost of being invisible to the people who are supposed to see you. They construct a version of you early, before you have had the chance to become yourself, and they maintain that version, because revising it would require them to admit they had been wrong. And some people find that admission more expensive than the truth. So you stay the wallpaper, you stay the kitchen, and after enough years, you start to wonder, even against the evidence, whether the wallpaper version is somehow the real one. I had a design magazine feature. I had 21 employees. I had a $4.3 million studio, and I still drove the old car to their house and wore the plain sweater and answered questions about my work with vague half-sentences, because 15 years of being told that family came first had installed something in me that took longer to uninstall than I would have preferred to admit. What finally uninstalled it was not a speech, not a confrontation, not a dramatic moment of saying out loud who I was. What uninstalled it was a $2.4 million meeting on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving and the simple act of choosing it, of not tying the apron one more time. I did not set out to teach anyone a lesson. I set out to sign a contract. The lesson arrived on its own, carried by a woman who had read a magazine profile and thought I was worth 2.5 hours of her Wednesday morning. The same woman my parents had invited to Thanksgiving dinner, expecting extraordinary food, and found instead 2 grocery store chickens and a cheese plate assembled from whatever was in the refrigerator. That is the specific kind of irony that life occasionally arranges without any help. My parents are not the villains of this story. They are people who made an assumption about which daughter would amount to something and never revisited it. They paid for that assumption in front of 24 guests and one very significant business contact. That is not nothing. It is a kind of reckoning, even if it arrived 15 years late. My father wrote a letter. He is trying, which is something he had not done before. Whether the trying becomes something real will depend on choices he has not made yet, and I am not waiting with held breath. My mother is still working through whatever she is working through. The door is not locked, but it is not standing open. It is simply there. Kayla has been quiet. I do not know yet what that silence means. I am giving it time. Donna Prescott called me the week after Thanksgiving and apologized for 12 years of attending Langley family dinners without once asking what I actually did. She said she was sorry. She said she had heard what Catherine said, that I was one of the most impressive designers she had encountered, and that every person in that room had heard it. She said my family had a great deal to account for, and that the community was not likely to let it go quietly. She also said something that nobody in my family had said to me directly in 15 years. She said I had built something remarkable, and that I deserved every piece of the success that had come from it. I sat with those words for a long time. They came from a near stranger, not from the voices I had spent my whole life hoping to hear them from. And I understood, sitting with that waiting for those specific voices to say the right things had been the most expensive habit I had ever maintained. The apron is still hanging in my parents' kitchen. I will never put it on again. Not as punishment, not as a statement, simply because the person who spent 15 Thanksgiving mornings in that kitchen, invisible and uncredited, and told her work could wait, That person was never who I actually was. She was who I agreed to be, because agreeing felt easier than the alternative. The alternative turned out to be a $2.4 million contract and a Sunday dinner, where someone else did the cooking. Your success does not require their acknowledgement. It never did. It only requires you to stop waiting for it, and to walk out of the kitchen. And if this story found you at the right moment, if something in it landed where it needed to, I have another one waiting for you right now. A woman who spent years being told she was too much, too difficult, too demanding, until the day the people who said it needed something only she could give. The link is on your screen right now. I'll see you there.